I'm Lee Orlando, and I'm a 5th grade teacher at C.P. Smith School in Burlington.
And I'm Katherine Grykien, and I am a 5th grade teacher at Champlain Elementary School in Burlington, Vermont.
Really, the first thing I would like to talk about, because it is part of my teaching, is how it affected me as a learner. Because I feel like I'm at my best when I'm teaching, if I'm also learning. And I was learning every minute along with my students. And, you know, there's that adage or piece of advice sometimes teachers get about not working harder than his or her students. And while I get the spirit in which that advice is given, I felt like I was working as hard as my students. And that was a good feeling, because it meant that we were becoming a true community of historians. So we were all kind of in there together, hunkering down with the primary documents and discovering things. And so for me as a teacher, the fact that I could also be a learner with my students was the most powerful.
And I echo everything she just said. I would add that for myself personally, I had never really taught history in this way, by approaching the documents and approaching the content area more as detectives. It's some of the language that's used in the unit, that we're looking for facts, we're looking for opinions, we're looking for interpretations. I learned things about incidents in history that I had really only one perspective on. Learning right along with them, and learning in a way that was not just, we've spoken a lot about the primary documents. You're not just looking at the documents, you're acting, you're being artistic, you're writing speeches. So I appreciated being able to teach in a way that met many different levels of Bloom's taxonomy and presenting information in different ways, because students truly were able to grasp the content because of the way it was presented through the teaching. One thing that the kids actually wrote a lot about in their own reflection of the unit was that they never thought that they really liked history, and this ended up being one of their favorite things they did all year. All the lessons build upon each other, and when you get to the end, one of the optional activities is to find an issue, a human rights issue that's going on right here in your community. And we had a panel of people come in from the Peace and Justice Center, from Friends of Burlington Gardens, just that represented different groups of people that are struggling to access human rights in our own area. And the kids wrote letters to the newspaper, to different companies such as Hershey's and Nike and Costco, and the amount of responses we got from the companies was really cool for us and the students. And what was interesting is some of the bigger companies that sent letters back, like Hershey's and Nike and Nestle, the kids were able to read the letter and say, wait a minute, they're not really supporting this. Like, they were able to really read critically from going through this process to see that they were able to write a letter back to you, but they weren't addressing the issue. So that was one of the neatest things that we discovered together. Being able to read a document more critically, because on the surface it looked like the companies were saying, we don't support child labor at all in the Ivory Coast, blah, 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 blah. But then when you really looked at it as a critical reader, they were saying, we don't believe in it, but it doesn't mean that we don't necessarily support it, because they do.
To follow up on that, the enduring understanding about the importance of gaining multiple perspectives on an event, students were so aware after hunkering down with some of these lessons how that impacted their own lives. And I think the pencil skit that we started out with, and the different perspectives of someone who was accused of taking a pencil, that immediately connected with them. And then throughout the unit, they were just aware of the importance of getting all sides and what bias meant. That was a new word for them. So they really made that their own, and I could see where they're going to take that far beyond just a historical context, but just into their own lives. That's really the most powerful, kind of enduring understanding, when it reaches across a certain subject area or content and now is useful in other areas of their lives. We did an all fifth grade hike in the fall, which is a tradition. And so we all had that common experience of being on the trail and seeing, similar sights and so forth. But when they went to interview each other about that event, it was amazing and eye-opening to them and to me what different experiences they had within that common field trip, and even had some friendly arguments about, well, this happened. No, that's not right. They took that turn, or, there were these different pieces to it. And we, in fact, just the other day, something came up where they were arguing over what really happened. And we said, isn't that the way it goes, right? We were all there. We all saw the same thing, and yet we're hearing slightly different details and how one reconciles that. So it's just a really far-reaching understanding that really comes forth in this unit about multiple perspectives. Powerful. It's really great.
So in addition to what Lee was saying, one of the things that occurred in our fifth grade classes is the same language was integrated into their own problems that every elementary school kid heading to middle school ends up coming into conflict with their friends. And one of the most useful tools was we would use the word perspective and bias. We would listen to everyone's perspective that was involved in the conflict, and it really made children actually have a little more empathy for the other party involved. When we had a couple things taken from the classroom, or fights between friends. It was about listening to each other, understanding that even if you were both experience the exact same thing, that one person has a different perspective than somebody else. And just to have more empathy for each other. And for groups of, I can make that go into anything, because it went into groups of people in our community. When we had an unfortunate event this year when somebody who was homeless passed away in one of the parks, and just to have an understanding, to have empathy for someone who lives very differently than us.
As a teacher, I think we want to do the best possible job. We have time is so short, and our day is so limited, and we often feel like we're not behind the 8 ball, or we sometimes beat ourselves up if a lesson doesn't go well. And so we feel like we really want to make the best use of our students' time. So as a teacher, feeling good about the content I was offering students, and as Katherine said, the way they were engaged, whether it was a tableau or a response, a written response, analysis, a critique of a certain document. I felt that every moment was really counting, even if it didn't go exactly as I wish it had, because that's just the nature of teaching something. But I felt like everything in that unit was purposeful. It built on something earlier. It made sense. We were building towards some really specific, meaningful goals. So as a teacher, I felt my teaching was strong, even for a first time doing a unit, and so it was rewarding as a teacher, I guess, is the best way to put it.
I also loved how integrated it was, that it was a history unit, but I was also teaching reading, writing, critical thinking skills. It ended up engulfing a large part of the day because it was so integrated. And as a teacher, I feel that the more integrated the units are, the more meaningful really it is for everyone.
But I think Katherine mentioned this, so I don't want to be repetitive, but the fact that for me, I was doing history in a way I'd never done history before. I, of course, came from the old school, and not so old school, open up the textbook and whatever's there is history, and that's, answer questions and so forth. So to have an inquiry-based, constructivist approach to doing history was, for me as a learner and a teacher, a new thing. It was just amazing. I felt very excited by the whole thing.
I thought that the way that the unit started off, before you get to the heart of the American Revolution, you spend a great deal of time learning about human rights, who has access, who doesn't. Also analyzing the primary documents for Thomas Jefferson's perspective on women, on the Pilgrims and the Native Americans, on the Taínos and Christopher Columbus. So you actually learned about many time periods before you got to the bulk of the American Revolution and the writing of the Declaration of Independence. And I thought that was a nice way to build the skills that students were going to need before you actually attacked that particular subject. So I liked how it went, you got some practice in it, looking, reading, analyzing, talking about bias, talking about who has access to human rights, who doesn't. And I liked how the lessons built upon each other before you actually got to the learning of the colonists and the writing of the Declaration of Independence and so on. I liked that approach.
And the other thing that struck me is, we're talking about a significant chunk of time that we're charged with teaching, and sometimes it's overwhelming, and you end up not covering, or actually you're covering, but not doing anything really well. And I was pleasantly surprised with the idea that less is more. So if we are just looking at the Boston Massacre, say, or Christopher Columbus's encounter with the Taíno, looking at those pieces, but with much more richness of discussion and with that critical eye, we got much more out of it than if we had just sort of plowed through a whole bunch of content and then closed the book. So this is a unit where less, in the sense of the whole piece of history, less was definitely more, if that makes sense. That was a when I got the student feedback forms, that particular lesson was one that stood out for them. And I think it was multifaceted. It involved drama. It involved analysis of accounts from different perspectives. They were coming together in pairs, but then also having some group discussion. So it was a multifaceted lesson, and they just really got, the idea of what Christopher encounters Columbus with natives entailed and what the repercussions of that were. And so that stuck with them. That was a really powerful lesson. It was really rich. Well, the title of the lesson was In Their Shoes. And after looking at the Taíno perspective and Columbus's perspective, which was a primary source document, students assumed the role of either a native or a European explorer or European, explorer, I guess is the best way to say it. And they dramatized in a kind of short skit that particular encounter and what they might say to each other in a simple sentence or two. And so they stood on some footsteps and acted that piece out and kind of in their mind recreated what happened.
There was also a great political cartoon that went along with that lesson, and it had a picture of Christopher Columbus's boat leaving the encounter, and you saw a pile of, cartoon people piled up, left behind, of dead bodies. And that to them, I think, wow. That made a lasting impression on them and got them to actually have some emotion behind it, in addition to the readings. So one of the greatest things that came out of the unit from the student feedback forums was over and over and over again, the students talked about how they were now looking at history and really life through a new lens, that there is bias, that there is the importance of working towards and helping people to access human rights. I think that it provides teachers with an incredible amount of resources to teach history really well. I think that social studies and history has, for quite a while, been put on the back burner, and that teachers aren't necessarily held accountable for teaching history, and if they are, it comes in pieces here and there. But to use this as the curriculum would service every teacher, every child. I mean, it's I could not think of a reason not to do it. I wanted something I could work from, and it's incredibly comprehensive. The lessons are very well developed. That's really why, honestly, I started to think about doing it, is because it was something that had been made and that I knew that I could work from.
And I've been in the district for a while now, and I love history myself, but I've never felt that I've been well equipped to do an excellent job at that, or even a very good or good job. And I've felt it's been more teach, test, and hope for the best, that sort of saying that you do what you can, but you're gathering things with not as much purpose and rigor as you'd like. So this unit was rigorous. It prompted me and my students to really think, and every lesson was that rich. I felt that nothing was wasted, everything had a purpose, and it built. So for someone who had never had a unit like that in all the years I've been teaching in the district, it was super exciting, and I can only hope that more of these units will be developed so that we as a district can offer this to all of our students, and the payoff will be huge, not just as in the context of history, but as we were saying, as people, getting along with one another, empathizing, having some of those life skills that we so dearly want them to have, to be responsible citizens. It's in this unit. It can begin with units like this. We're definitely in now a global society. We communicate instantly with people all over the world. And with that ability also comes the potential for a lot of misunderstanding and conflict. So in creating these global citizens, which certainly is part of our charge as teachers, I think a unit like this is hugely important. It's powerful because it is giving students that idea of being open to other perspectives, being aware of bias, being critical readers of whatever text comes their way, whether it's a historic document or something they see on the web. So as far as being culturally competent and being responsible when one is among diverse peers and so forth, I think this unit helps equip our students and our teachers too, for that matter. It works both ways. We're all learning from a unit like this. We tend to, have like a grab bag of stuff that sound good and sound fun, but may not lead us to our ultimate goals. And you've done a wonderful job of that, Brennan, in really designing this in a very deliberate, purposeful way.
I don't think I've ever come across any resource that has laid things out so well. I think that I know that I could have never created something like this, nor do I have the time to, or really the knowledge. And maybe that's something that sometimes keeps people away from history, is that, they themselves don't have a true understanding.
I know there was some question about whether those lessons were, overly detailed, and my take on that, and I think I mentioned this earlier, is that no, it's really critical, I think, for all of us, whether we've been teaching a long time or our new teachers, to have an idea of the flow of the lesson itself. And certainly we can, tweak them in a way that makes sense for our particular class or whatever, but the level of detail that's in each of those lessons was immensely helpful, because then in my mind's eye, before I taught it, I could sort of see how it played out, and then it helped me to be better prepared. So the level of detail was excellent.
One of my favorite parts was when we had the perspectives on the Declaration of Independence Day, and families came in. Each student was able to write a persuasive speech and perform it. And then at the end, we had a question and answer period where the parents asked the kids questions, and the level of knowledge that the kids showed to their parents' questions blew everyone away. They got really into their character with, how they would speak and their costume. And we even had other teachers from previous grades come up and watch, and everyone just was, blown away by it. It wasn't just a short little paragraph that they read. There was factual information in their speeches. So in this lesson, students were given several documents to read through, and they were given a role, and their role represented somebody that was living during colonial America. So it could be a poet, it could be an enslaved African, it could be a governor, it could be a Quaker, it could be an abolitionist. So they all took on these different roles, and they had to read through more than one document to read through the facts and read through the opinions and interpretations and come up with taking a stand. Were they for the revolution? Were they against it? Or did they really not care?
A part that was, a lesson that was relatively a small part of the unit was the the Pledge of Allegiance. Putting that in their own words. And I thought, these are fifth graders. They've said the Pledge of Allegiance ever since kindergarten. But I can honestly say that probably for the first time in their lives, they understood what those words meant, because they had to really look at the words and then restate them in a kid-friendly way. And that whole exercise, which was very difficult to do, really required some thinking about the meanings of each of those key words. That was really powerful for them. And they ended up making posters of their class version and delivering them to the other classes and sharing that with the whole school community. And it seemed like too good to share. Not to share.
Yeah.
They said, wait a minute, we've got this great thing here. We got to take it out into our school community at the very least. And so those became the class presentations. And we got lots of feedback from other teachers about how their students, whether they were first graders or fourth graders, really appreciated that and really got something out of the student presentations of the kid-friendly pledge. That was really great.